And so we're going to talk about that, and then also the sustainability of propagation and culturing. So Nick has done a lot of research and has had a lot of experience looking into the rule, has been on a couple conference calls where they've discussed the implications of the rule. So we're going to go ahead and start off with Nick.
All right. Well, just in general, just a couple months ago, I got involved in a conference call with NOAA Fisheries, and they basically talked about how they came up with the decision to list certain species of Pacific and Atlantic corals as endangered species, which included, the ones I was talking about earlier are going from threatened to endangered. That's not really going to affect our day-to-day lives all that much, but there are some that are in the hobby from the Pacific, and basically what that's going to mean to us, it's probably going to go into effect at the end of 2013. Just a few species of acropora, a few other aquarium relevant things, and branching frog spawn is probably the big one that all of us are very familiar with, that it's no longer going to be illegal to own those things, but it will become illegal to import and to sell them. Now overall, when something's listed as endangered species, it's a good thing. That means that the U.S. is making efforts to help bring that species back. So that means that money's being spent to help conservation programs and such to try to rebuild that population. So it's not all doom and gloom, but I guess that pretty much covers it all, right? Is that good?
So maybe pass that mic down to Charles, and we can talk about how public institutions can raise awareness on threatened and endangered species as well.
It's a bromance. Just call them each other on our talk. Actually, we're talking about this, right? Yes. Okay. My understanding was in the beginning that this was a proposed rule, and one of the reasons why is that the conservation organization that basically submitted an application to have these, I think it was like 80-something species, of which they then determined that 66 warranted further investigation. And by submitting that request, they basically forced the federal government to look at it. So they had to do this investigation. And there was only, I think, a handful of them that really seemed to warrant having that designation as endangered species. There's a lot of concern in the public aquarium community that this would preclude us from exchanging fragments between institutions. It would preclude us from collecting from the wild and importing things for research, that kind of stuff. And the concern also was that there was a mention of an exclusion for public aquariums, although there was some talk that would be included. That's not been finalized. They're still soliciting comments from the public about this ruling, so as far as I know, it's not yet a done deal. And I think, for me, the bottom line is that I don't think that this is going to happen in any way, because the reason why these corals are being threatened is because of climate change. It has nothing to do with our hobby. It has nothing to do with anything like that, with the trade of these corals. It is obviously a pressure that we put on these populations that are already under pressure from environmental concerns. So does it affect it? Probably not, but in the public eye, it does. I think that there are enough species out there that it's not going to have a huge impact. I just don't see that the goal is going to be achieved, because the other thing that the government will have to do now is they have to develop a response and action plan for these species. And that's a very expensive, long process. When you think about the American eagle and some of the owls and some of the other birds and animals that are put on that list, and the amount of effort that goes into trying to develop a species recovery plan. I don't know how you're going to do that for corals that come from different countries. And the other danger that I see is that when they did list the 2 Caribbean acroporas, Fish and Wildlife said, well, we can't just identify these things as species. So what we want from now on is that every single acropora that comes into the country has to be identified as species. So now when we were in the Philippines collecting, we shipped in a bunch of acropora that the year before we had just said as acropora spud. Fish and Wildlife saying, you need to put down species for these corals that are coming in tomorrow. So they called us in the Philippines at like 4 in the morning and told us, you guys need to identify all these corals. well, they've already been shipped. So they said, well, just do the best you can. And so that's what we did. And the reality is that the Fish and Wildlife is not equipped to identify these corals either. And so my fear is that when these other corals are going to get listed, that they're going to turn around and say the same thing. We haven't got the manpower and resources to open up every coral box and see which is a Philiopyra cora, which is not. So that they're just going to say you have to identify everything to species. So there are a number of corals that they have to identify to species now. This may just increase that number. And so you can imagine there's probably 4 people in the world that can accurately identify Acropora, and none of those 4 will agree what that Acropora is. So if you're inspecting an export station in Indonesia to be able to identify these things as species, it's just not going to be practical. So I think it's going to be that they're going to do the best they can, and then as long as it's got a name on it, they probably don't care. But I could be wrong. The thing with the Acropora corals is they're brown corals, and we're like, really? You think we're going to ship a coral from Florida to the Philippines and back to San Francisco just to swindle it in for a brown coral? I don't think so. But that's not how they think. It's more about how is it easy for us to regulate those, because they are also strapped in terms of manpower and funding. So it's not an easy task for them to identify. They're not dealing with corals. They're dealing with furs and shells and all kinds of. You wouldn't believe the kind of stuff that they have to look at. It's crazy. I don't think it's going to be that bad.
You know, as a hobbyist, I've grown most of my reef tanks from little tiny frags. And those frags, I'm one of these guys that I have a rule, never frag a frag. I cannot stand these little dots that are, sorry to the sellers, I hate these little dots that are being sold that are so small. And yes, it will grow, it's DNA. We just need a little DNA and a little TLC and all of a sudden you got a coral. But it takes time, and when things get big, and then you need to take some out of your tank and you want to share them with other club members or other hobbyists, that's great. I mean, I've given some to the fish store in exchange for fish food. You know, we've done different things. I mean, over the years, I've given away hundreds of frags. And I'm not a guy that sells corals. I can't stand it. It drives me nuts. And I stay out of the for sale form almost exclusively because I cannot stand what's going on in there. I just, you know, whatever. And, you know, I had a guy stop by my house when I was working on the tank, and I broke off a big piece of coral that was the size of my hand. And I was like, do you want a frag? And, you know, he was like, yeah, like here. He was, the whole thing? I was like, wow, yeah, it just broke off. And, you know, that's my point, is that if they're really trying to say, like you said, they can't even identify these species, and yet they're trying to make a law, potentially, that's the thing. Everything I'm reading, I tend to wonder how much of what I'm reading is truth. I always do that, and I'm super cynical. And so I think about the whole process. When these bags show up, if you've ever been to your fish store and you've looked at the bags that arrive, some of them are murky and the coral's already dying. Some, you can't even see through because there's a shield in there and they flip it over. And are they opening up each bag, taking out a coral? Fish and Wildlife is really going to do this, and then they're going to know what it is. We know more about these corals than those guys do, even though their job is to make sure nothing illegal is happening. There's corals out there like the black coral that are famous around Hawaii, and those apparently get smuggled. And I went to several jewelry stores in Hawaii where they make jewelry. That's beautiful. It's hard to believe it came from the stick. You know, this hard calcified coral that came out of the ocean. We're not even trying to turn in jewelry. We're actually growing our stuff to share with others. And from what I understand of the wording, it appears that even hobbyists couldn't take a coral out of their tank and give a frag to another person, let alone sell it. That it could become an illegal act. Now, that's my interpretation, and I could have misread it, or maybe it wasn't stated clearly enough, or maybe the wording is so ambiguous that it could be, we could be accused of that, being criminals for sharing frog spawn, or torch corals. And these are easy to grow corals that grow into giant colonies with just a little attention to our tanks. And it really concerns me that they're trying to say, well, we need to know what these are. And the other thing that concerns me, and I think you touched on it, is that the ocean acidification, the ocean temperature is rising, some corals are dying anyway. It almost seems smarter to get some of those corals out of the ocean into some controlled climates, like a big public aquarium, like 1,000 aquariums across the United States with people that we have some DNA to work with in case none of it makes in the ocean. You know, we might, I mean, Matt Peterson has a great article about Noah's Ark and talking about us being stewards to keep these species alive because they might not survive otherwise. So the ruling is coming very soon, And according to the website, you had until the 6th to reply, and I believe today is the 6th. So if you can look it up tonight on Reef Builders and find the link and click comment, and you can't put a lot. But if you'll read a couple of these articles, I put an article on the front page of Reef Addicts. You can go there and read that. Matt Peterson wrote an article on reef to rainforest. I can't remember. Anyway, email me and I'll send you all the links. It's no problem. If you read just a little bit, you should be able to formulate an answer. It's not like you have to know everything about this topic to sound like you know what you're talking about. You probably know a lot more than the guys that are trying to make this decision.
I could talk about this for a long time. But various thoughts on the subject of the endangered species. To give an opposite view, like what Charles was saying, I think nobody knows the answer to what's going to happen, but just in talking to people and my own thoughts on some of this, like Charles was saying, he thinks that possibly it's not going to make that much difference. People are going to identify things to the species. It's hard to identify these things for all of us down to the species, and so it might just be kind of like, hey, as long as there's a name on there, let it go. The opposite, complete opposite end of the spectrum is if people really get fired up and serious about this with the government, you could end up in a situation where importers are scared to send anything that's acropora because they can't identify them either, and they're scared that, hey, I'm sending all this stuff into the United States, and if I accidentally put one of the wrong coral in here, the whole shipment gets seized and I get a fine. So we could end up with something like that. It's really not going to affect us at all, or it could stop the importation of acropores, except for maybe a handful of clearly identifiable specimens that are not on the list, or it can fall anywhere in between. And that's a tough one when they're trying to decide if they're going to do this or how it's going to impact us. We don't really know. I don't really know how it's going to impact us. Aside from that, carrying on the same things we're talking about here, how big an impact does the hobby make on coral reefs out there in the real world? We can debate about that all the time. And as hobbyists, of course, we're going to tend to take a denialist stance and say, hey, we don't really make very much impact. So we say, well, we're not that big a deal. We don't affect the reefs that much. We don't affect the reefs that much. You need to step back and take an objective view. Just saying that because you're a hobbyist and you want to keep a reef tank, or is that actually the truth, that we don't make a big impact? Well, guess what? I don't think we make that big an impact. That's the good news. Even from like a science point of view, not an emotional point of view, when we stand back and look like, yeah, what is happening to reefs and why are they dying? It's not the aquarium hobby. I can assure you of that. If anything, the aquarium hobby, the argument I've made with lots of people is we have most certainly raised awareness tremendously about reefs and have increased, let's say, caring about reefs in the richest country in the world. So I always look at the reef aquariums to a large degree as being a teaching tools. I teach about reef aquariums and reef stuff in one of the courses that I teach. You get people interested in it because they're interested in it and they know something about it, they care more about it. So there's that side of it. As far as what's killing the reefs, we've already brought up climate change. Of course, you've got to remember we're in a country where we've still got plenty of people that are in complete denial that there even is climate change, so you're not going to get very far with that with a lot of folks. Ocean acidification is a big problem. The other one that doesn't come up that much is eutrophication. For example, I'm from Florida, the Florida Keys. Why are all the reefs dead in the Florida Keys? It's not global warming. It's not ocean acidification. It's fertilizer. It's agriculture there in South Florida, all the sugar cane and the tomatoes and stuff like this. They pour fertilizer on that stuff. The rock there is very porous in this fertilizer. A lot of it gets washed right out of the Florida Bay. A lot of it soaks into the ground, literally soaks out of the sides of the state. The key islands themselves are porous limestone. We've got all this development in the last 20 years where they're coming in and building huge subdivisions and all this housing. They immediately throw sod all over the place and they start fertilizing. They don't stop fertilizing. Every time it rains, that fertilizer soaks right into the ground, right out of the sides of the island. There's places down there where I take students, for example, where they've got boat canals cut into these neighborhoods where they can cut down into the limestone like this. And when you get in the water, you can actually see fresh water soaking out of the limestone and mixing in with the salt water. And it's nutrient laden. So there's algae. And just like in a reef tank, you don't want your nutrients to get too high, especially phosphorus and so on and so forth, and that's exactly what we're doing down here. And lots of other places, not just in the United States either by any means, even out there in the Pacific, the same sort of stuff. You can look up all kinds of things most people have never heard of, like all the shrimp farms in Vietnam and the Philippines that are destroying the reefs offshore because they dig big pits. They open next to the shore, they open them up, they flood it with seawater, they close it off, they fertilize the heck out of it, they raise shrimp, which we eat here in the United States. Almost all the shrimp we get, by the way, is imported now. After a while, the water gets so nasty in these things, the shrimp won't live, so they just get a bulldozer, open it up, flush all that gunk right out onto the reef, start over again. So there's all these little things like that. I'm sure a handful of shrimp farms can do more damage than the entire aquarium operates here in 1 year. And so there's all these different sort of insults. And the question, and then I think the bigger question is, are we going to do anything about that? Not really. Anybody going to stop eating anytime soon? No. I don't think anybody's going to stop driving a car anytime soon. I'm sort of pessimistic on the subject too. And unfortunately, I'm sorry. But at least don't feel bad about having an aquarium. It's all the other stuff that we're doing that's the big problem. And I was going to say that when we're talking about getting into these endangered species and bleaching and that sort of stuff like that, one of the most depressing things that's come out, which I'll hit you with, is there have been some people coming out very recently, big-time researchers that have come out and said things like, you know what, these times of talking about what are we going to do to save the reefs, and let's go plant frags, and let's do all this. There are people now talking about that time is past. Let's start talking about what are we going to do without reefs. Because the window or the opportunity to really save reefs, we're already outside of it. We've screwed things up so bad. And I'm not saying that that's the position I subscribe to, but there are people that are already saying that, and it's just too late. So back to the thing with putting these things on the endangered species list, to me it almost just seems pointless. I don't think that's the problem. I sleep well at night, even though I've got a tank full of corals, and I don't really know what impact this would have at all. Again, it might have almost no impact on the hobby. I think it might have almost no impact on the reef as well. And that's about it. There you go.
I think the question you need to ask yourself is, will this actually help corals in the wild by listing as endangered species? And I think in the case of the Caribbean and the Florida croppers, there can be a case made for if they get listed as endangered species. This means that that kind of development, and that kind of sewage runoff and fertilizer overuse, that's going to come under scrutiny now, because it's just like if you're going in and logging forests and killing the owl population. That's what we're looking at now. That's what the government's going to be looking at. What's affecting these corals? And they have enough data that they can find out. And I think it's already been established that one of the diseases is linked to the septic tanks and the keys. It's linked to human waste. So that could be one good thing that would come out of this. But I think, has listing these things as threatened, has it stopped anything yet? Has it been any populations recovered as a result of this? No. And the other thing that the scientific community is worried about is once they begin listed as endangered species, your ability to do research on them becomes severely restricted, and it becomes onerous. And NOAA has already come out and said, we will do everything that we can to make it still possible for you to be able to continue to do research to recover the species. So, I mean, these are all well-intentioned things, but we have to, neither Nick and I can remember the name of the group. If anyone remembers the name of the group that submitted the original petition, if you look at their website and what they stand for, it's got nothing to do with conservation. It has to do with ethics. It's a lot like the debate that's going on in Hawaii down there, catching fish. It has nothing to do with the fact that it's harming the environment. It's about ethics. These are people who don't feel that these things should be kept in captivity. End of message. Whether you can defend it and say it's sustainable or not, they don't care. Their point is, you shouldn't be keeping this stuff. It's not ethical. And I think when we're looking at corals, we're looking at an industry that it can be and is sustainable to some extent. Right now, I think there's a lot more that can be done to make it so, but it's definitely something that can be done. done sustainably, as has been shown in Australia, with the fish collecting and now the coral collecting. It's managed, it's sustainable. So why is this bad? Because some people don't think it's right to keep things in captivity.
One thing that none of us mentioned, I thought of it when we were talking, also that same wording of this possible legislation, it didn't exclude maricultured or aquacultured corals. So if you have like Walt Smith growing corals to sell to the trade, he's not taking corals, he's growing his corals. He's taking his broodstock and making more. If you have companies, and then you've got Dr. Mack growing clams in Tahiti, and there's these different ORA growing corals. They're all doing, and if these corals under the classification are considered endangered or worse, threatened, whichever the ranking is, if they don't exclude aquaculture and mariculture, they've really made an impossibility for our hobby for certain coral acquisition in the future and the sharing thereof.
And just one more comment on what Mark was saying there is all these corals that are being cultured and farmed, and clams especially, generally speaking, a lot of those are being reintroduced as well as sold to hobbyists. And selling to hobbyists gives them their money to be able to do this, to be able to do grassroots reintroduction projects and things like that. So if that goes away, the health of the reef as well as the incentive for the people living around those reefs kind of goes away. And so it's not a good thing overall. And just a general wrap up of all this, how many in the audience, how many of you guys like Pacific corals a lot? Raise your hands. Now, how many of you have ever gone and seen those in the wild? Not as many, right? I mean, just like myself, the only time I've seen Pacific corals is in aquariums. And aquariums play a really important role in fostering that appreciation, whether it be at Steinhardt Aquarium, seeing an amazing, huge display, or in your home aquarium. Your family members, your friends, they know what a coral is because of you, because of your home aquarium. It's important that that never gets lost, you know. Anyway.
So you just touched on a really great topic that we were going to head to next. So as teachers, hobbyists, scientists, industry people, and hobbyists in general, and just whatever we do in our day-to-day lives, whether we teach, whether we work with students, whether we work with people, whoever we work with, how can we spread the message of threatened, endangered marine and freshwater species for a more sustainable cause?
Sorry, we kind of missed that. Well, we were talking about, if you guys are familiar with the Coral Restoration Foundation, Ken Niedermeyer's work in the Keys, Charles was asking whether or not, what would the jurisdiction be as far as that being an endangered species. And some of the corals they work with, they begin as just little blobs that settle out on aquacultured livestock, and there's no laws that you're allowed to have that in your aquarium and all that, but it would greatly affect some of them where they go in and extract smaller colonies of palmata that are really struggling, and then they take them and they fragment them and they grow them out into big, incredible, much better colonies, healthier, and then they put them back on the reef. So it would definitely have an effect on that. At least that's my opinion on it.
Whenever she talks, you just stop. You just do your thing. That's your end. One of the things I've always tried to look at with any coral in my tank is, what if this was the last one of this one coral? What if I had the last one? Because it's so frustrating. You work so hard with your tank, and then something starts going downhill, and all my focus goes to that one coral. Even though I got 15 happy ones, it's like that. What's wrong with that one? What if it's the last one? What if no one else can get it again? So I'm always trying to hang onto that DNA. I'm just like, come on, this little guy, hang in there. Don't let anyone touch him. Don't pick at it with a shrimp. Don't let an enemy touch it. And I try to think of what can I do to make this last longer, and I really focus on it rather than thinking of it as disposable or, it's not recycled. It's not, every coral, it's just like, okay, I'm going to call out some guy in our club, he's not here, so it doesn't matter. But he was buying clams. I know it's not corals, but he was buying clams. He loved them. He was buying 14, 15 at a time. He loved them. He filled his tank with them, and they kept dying. And he came over and brought his roommate with him. And they're looking at my reef, and the roommate's like, you know, Mark's tank is beautiful. You know, why can't we just do this? Why do you keep buying clams? And they keep dying. He said right in front of me, and sometimes I can be a little bit more. And I just said, you know, if those were puppies, you'd be arrested. And he just looked at me, and I was like, I mean, seriously, take care of a few and enjoy, rather than just going through them. And what had happened was there was this, I think the Vietnam clams, you would know all about clams, but the Vietnam clams brought in some kind of disease with the U.S., and a lot of clams were declining. You'd have a healthy clam, you put a new one in, and lose 2. Or you'd have 1, you'd have 5, and you'd have 0. And so he actually stopped buying clams, and that roommate said, thank you so much, because he never listened until you compared him to puppy dogs, where you can't go kill 14 at a time and then get more at the store tomorrow. They're gonna, you know, call the police. And we should be looking at these animals as animals, and we are stewards. We are, you know, we talk about husbandry of the aquariums. I mean, it's a job to keep these animals alive, to grow them, to keep them thriving. It's not just basic survival. We want them to turn into enormous corals. Like I said, don't frag a frag, grow into something huge, and then if you have lack of space and you need to get some out and give to someone else, I'm fine with it. If you want to sell it, I'm fine with it. But just let your coral grow into something amazing.
Weren't you talking about how to get people interested or educated, something like that? Or to care about reefs, something like that. But one of the best things I could say that if I could spread the word aquarium hobbyist and other people like that, take your own time, find out the benefits of having coral reefs. That's one of the big things. In fact, somebody asked earlier when somebody was talking, you know, well, what would happen if the coral reef died? And I can't remember who it was now. Loss of shoreline protection? No. And I said, well, you know, if the reef die off, we're going to lose a lot of shoreline protection and typhoons, you know, especially in the Pacific and stuff like that. It's going to affect shoreline communities and that sort of thing like that. It's well worth your time to do a little bit of homework and actually look at everything that we get from reefs and what's going to happen when we lose our protection. I should say if we lose them. Because that'll get you more interested. If people think like, you know what, they're pretty and I like having an aquarium, but you know, if they sort of die off, it's not that big a deal. It's way over there in the Pacific. It doesn't affect you that much. We get a whole lot from reefs, and if the reefs are dying off, it's affecting the whole marine ecosystem. There's a lot of benefit from it too. It's not just shoreline protection. One of them, if people love to think about money, I mean, ecotourism. Get Florida Keys is a great example. They used to have whole plane loads of scuba divers coming out of Charles de Gaulle, out of Paris. You can fly from Paris, you can fly from London, right into Key West. Plane loads of divers come to see the reefs because it's a lot closer to fly right over there to Key West from the western end of Europe than to fly all the way east and go over to the Pacific. And the reefs used to be fantastic. And you know, I make a joke at school that nowadays the primary reason people go down to Key West now are for strip clubs and bars for partying. There's not much diving down there anymore. It's hardly any at all. The Naval Air Station is what really brings a lot of money to the area. Fishing has declined because the reefs have declined and so on and so forth. So it's really affected the local economy down there tremendously, actually. And the same thing happens in other places too. Aside from that, a lot of people, well, obviously not necessarily money, but when the reefs are dying off, it also affects a lot of people's ability to eat, which is something a lot of us Americans don't think about because we've got no shortage of food. But the reefs do provide a heck of a lot of food for people in the Pacific Islanders, things like that. If they go, all the fish go too, for the most part. A lot of that habitat is lost, the species lost. We don't have enough time here. I mean, we'll take a book, but there are good books out there. There's plenty of stuff on the internet. Go through and look at, well, what do we get from reefs? Why are they so important? You know, it's a lot more than they're just pretty. Or they help protect a few places from storms. And I write a lot of stuff. I do when I can. And of course, I teach it. I know some other folks do too. But people have got to read and care about it for it to matter. You write all the articles you want. If nobody reads it, it's not really doing anything. Yeah.
Well, I think institutions like ours and and Nick's do a lot for public education as well. And we have, since we've opened, we've had over 6 million people come through our doors in 4 years, and they've all been exposed to our programs and whatnot. We also have a lot of teacher education that we do. There's a lot of things that go into this. We also are active in the Philippines. Our education department goes to the Philippines, and they provide educational materials for the schools there. Most of the people there have no idea what they have below the water. A lot of them can't swim. They're fishermen, they're on boats, they never go in the water. So it's all about instilling in them the knowledge of what they have and what they're losing, and also to help them with recovery. And there are a lot of success stories in the Philippines right now. There are whole areas that are now being designated as marine protected areas, not by the government, but by the local villages, who have heard from other villages that, wow, we got one of these marine protected areas, and now our fish, we get fish to feed our families. And so they are now clamoring to have more and more of their coastlines designated as non-fishing and low extraction areas. There's areas that we saw where there was dynamiting many years ago that has now been stopped, and the reefs are recovering. There was one village where we went to where there was a woman who was the village leader who had prohibited anyone from going there to fish or dive. And our researchers team was there, and they actually got permission from her to actually dive. No one had dove there in 5 years. And it was right in front of their village. They weren't allowed to take pictures, so you wanted everybody to know what was there. They came up and they said it was one of the best reefs they'd ever seen. And so reefs do recover, and they do recover fairly rapidly if given the chance. And that's why having this Endangered Species Act thing, I just don't think it's going to help reefs to recover very well. It's only through our own actions and education of the public and the next generation coming up about what the challenges are. And, you know, to say that climate change isn't happening is just crazy. There's enough evidence out there to show it, and ocean acidification is a result of climate change. They're not separate issues. And what we're seeing now is that the pH is slowly starting to drop. There's already studies showing that corals are not going to be able to manage that. And as we continue to have sea level rise, the corals are not going to be able to grow fast enough to keep up with that because they can't calcify quick enough. So there's lots of things going on a very large scale, and the only way that we can have impact is by our own personal actions, and also by making it known to our legislatures that we believe in this and we know what's happening, and we want you to do something about it. And that's the bottom line. We've seen political change in the Middle East, many countries there, start at the grassroots level, start with the people. And you got to make yourself heard. That's the thing.
Just generally speaking with regards to education, because these guys pretty much covered it all, but you know, that's part of why we do what we do in the public aquarium industry is that I want people to look at my aquarium, say they're beautiful, and notice one little animal in there and just say, you know, I care about a skunk cleaner shrimp. I think that's really cool. And next time it's, who knows, there's some sort of legislation, it just changes the way they think and the way they vote, or they just think there's pretty stuff down there in the ocean, so I care about not throwing this trash in the ocean. Anything like that. And, you know, that's really a big part of why we do what we do. Other question?
And then I just wanted to add to that, we have an ocean acidification messaging now that's going on with our public programs, and they basically talk to the diver in the water, and they talk about ocean acidification, and it's about getting it to the level that people can relate to. A lot of that stuff just goes over their heads. So we talk about lemonade. You know, have you ever had lemonade spill on a cut? You know, or lemon juice? It stings, it hurts. And we talk about what's happening with the pH in the ocean. And after one of the presentations, a little 6-year-old girl stood up and said, "What can I do about ocean acidification?" So the message is getting out there.
So we've got about 15 minutes left, and we're going to open it up to general questions. Whether you have a question about conservation or anything specific that they talked about earlier today.
What do you believe are the the most common misperceptions that aquarists have currently?
For any of us, or
All of you. All of you.
probably that whether it be hobbyists or public aquarists, that we don't care about the effect it's having on nature to have these animals. And I think everyone in this room would echo that same sentiment, that we care about them more than the average person that doesn't know what we're really talking about when we mention corals and coral reefs. So to me, that's probably the biggest one.
I think that people feel they have a right to keep stuff. I don't think you have a right, it's a privilege to keep these animals, and they should be treated like that. And there's been some discussion. I mean, I remember when I was buying fish in the 70s, you know, a coral beauty from the Philippines cost $15, $20. It still costs $15 or $20. How can that be? There's people there that are not making very much money doing this, and people seem to demand these low prices. That's their right to have these things. Some people feel, well, maybe if we doubled the price of everything or tripled the price of everything, people would take better care of what they have and appreciate it more. I don't know.
It's funny you should say that. We had a guy in our club who was selling his frags at what I consider too high a price. And this is before we are where we have nickname corals and everyone's just paying top dollar for a dot. And I said, you know, your prices are too high, it's not right. And he said, if I sell you this frag for $5 and it dies, you don't care. But if I sell you this frag for $45, you're going to do what you can to keep it alive. I grew it to this point, and you should care. And I was like, man. I mean, I kind of see where he's coming from, but I totally disagree with what he's doing because, listen, I mean, we used to buy colonies for $30, $40, and now you want to get a frag, and it's like $125, and the fish stores are charging a lot just for a frag, like that $45, $50, $60 price. And the providers found out what we're paying, and they're charging more. And I mean, the hobbyists have raised the price of the hobby already. But okay, misconception of the hobby kind of ties into this a little bit. I'm not really talking out of topic. My biggest pet peeve ever: this hobby will pay for itself. I hate that. And I've heard that a billion times. And these guys just, I mean, you see them coming a mile away on the forum, and they're selling corals left and right. And I'm like, where's your tank? Let's see your tank. And it's just like, you know, 15 little frags. And that's all they have. And they're just selling them to get more frags that are worth even more to sell more. And it's like, no, this, I mean, when you buy a puppy, how do you get it to pay for itself? Or even pick up its own poop? I mean, you know, it's you know, I can't believe that people are thinking the saltwater hobby is going to pay for itself. It is not. It is a hobby. It is expensive. It's fun. It's rewarding. But you should not be looking at it as a way to make a living, unless you want to be Let's Reef.
Break even. All right, this will be funny. The first thing that popped in my head when you said misconception is I think of how many times when I used to be in the business and run a shop and everything, is how many times I had to tell somebody, no, it's really not that hard to keep a saltwater aquarium. So it used to be the big thing, oh, freshwater tanks are easy, but those saltwater tanks, those are really hard to take care of, aren't they? Like, no. Now, reef aquarium is a little different. But I try to tell them, look, it's a saltwater aquarium. For some fish, you got a box, you just have to put salt in the water. Get a damsel. It's pretty, it's blue and yellow and stuff, and so they are. And I try to tell you, that in the old days, shipping was a lot worse, salt was worse. People don't know what they were doing. People were still using under gravel filters, and it's actually pretty easy nowadays to have just a saltwater fish aquarium. It's certainly no more difficult than a freshwater tank to me, except you got to buy some salt. That's about it.
I read it online.
All right, have we got another question?
It's kind of more of a comment to something Charles said about the ethics of keeping stuff in an aquarium. I was traveling in Italy and they had a trial against a guy who had a goldfish in a goldfish bowl, and that was a crime. That's how far this can go. In Florida, two of the people that do live collecting of live rock, those guys, they will not give them permits anymore. They can't take it away from them, but as soon as those guys die, there's no way to collect stuff from the keys, and that's a sustainable process. So the idea, the implications here are pretty heavy as to somebody regulating, but they don't know what they regulate. That's why the idea of us getting involved, I'm not into politics and trying to change bureaucrats, but they're gonna put the damper on what you do again. That's a fact.
Comments to that? Amen.
It's just an observation or
I think we all echo what you're saying.
All right, get another question back here.
You mentioned it a little bit when you talked about collectors from the Philippines, for instance. I don't know a lot about that end of the hobby, but I'm really curious about what we as hobbyists in the U.S. can do about the sustainable living of people that are actually collecting the fish or the corals that we buy in the store. And what is it like? Are they now earning more of a livable wage, or is it, what's it like there?
Well, in the Philippines, they're not allowed to collect corals right now because it's illegal to export them. So there is no real trade in coral from the Philippines. But in some of the other countries, I know in the Solomon Islands, they had a lot of the local villagers, and it was interesting, it was mainly the women that were doing it. The men would go out and fish, and the women would harvest corals and make fragments and sell them. Most of the large fragmenting operations, like in Indonesia, are companies that are doing it. So I don't know how much of that is trickling down to the actual villages. I think they're just basically having collectors going out and getting things. A good friend of mine runs a facility in Vanuatu, and he employs locals on all his projects. He has a fish collecting station and also a coral propagation facility, so he's paying those people. In Fiji, the reefs are owned by the local villages, so they're the ones that directly benefit from anything that goes there. So I think Walt Smith pays some kind of a fee to the villages to be able to, to grow corals or collect corals from that area. I think there's a lot of, what you can do is ask your retailer if they know. A lot of them don't know, is where their corals are coming from and are they actually propagated? Because what's happening a lot is you have what are called chop shops, where they go out and they collect a large head, they break it into 1,000 little pieces, glue them on a piece of rock, call it aquaculture. Whereas in Vanuatu, it's against the law to do that. It has to be F2 or second generation coral from a fragment. So he has to collect fragments, grow them up, and then take fragments from those, and then that's the ones that he can sell. The stumbling block in the Philippines that they're coming up against is they haven't figured out yet how are they going to prove that something is aquaculture and something as opposed to something that someone just broke off the reef a piece this big and glued it onto something. So that's the challenge for them. And I think there's a number of environmental organizations. Conservation International is one that's done a lot of work in the Philippines. As I mentioned, there's a lot of success stories there. One of them is the area that we work in. Conservation International funds the rangers and the boats, and they patrol those reefs at night and keep fishermen out. And it's only through those efforts that those reefs are really recovering. But I have to say, the times that we dove there, I've done over 80 dives in that area. I rarely saw a fish bigger than that, because most of them are all fished out. We did see a humphead wrasse once. I've never seen a shark. I mean, they're just gone. But by protecting these areas long enough, they'll start coming back, as long as there's areas in that region where those animals can come from. So there are a number of protected areas. Tubataha is one. That's a World Heritage Site. It's always been protected where the Navy just ran a boat over it. They're being charged for that. So I think there's a lot of things that you can find online. There's a lot of conservation groups that are doing really good work in that area. And I would say go to these areas and visit them. And the money that you spend in those areas goes to those local economies as well. The area, again, that we work in the Mabini area in the Philippines, the divers that go there have to pay a fee. And that fee goes to help managing those underwater parks. So it's a win-win situation. It's not to say that it's all great. There are areas where dynamiting still occurs. There's still areas where cyanide is used. In Indonesia, they're using cyanide. They're dynamiting there as well. So there are still some issues to overcome. But I think there's a lot of success stories too that don't get enough publicity.
Based on some of the things that we see in movies and TV, whether it's shows like Tanked or Fish Tank Kings, or movies like Finding Nemo and the sequel that they have coming up, what are some of the things that you like about the way that the aquarist hobby and conservation are portrayed in media, and what are some of the most notable things that you wish could be improved in the way that this stuff's portrayed?
The good thing about it really is, like the Finding Nemo in particular, is, you know, now guests come in and they spend time looking at the aquariums. They didn't do that before. So, you know, that's a positive aspect of it. They look for Nemo, they look for Dory, they care. It comes with a lot of negatives as well. You know, when you see an aquarium being built on TV and then half an hour later at the end of the show, it's beautiful, full of fish. We all know that didn't just happen in an hour. You know, we know that's not sustainable. So, to me, the fact that it doesn't go through all of those steps in between to get to that point is it's irresponsible. But I do like the fact that it does foster some appreciation for our hobby.
Well, I've never seen any of those cable shows that are on cable, but I've heard about it before. I think the problem, like Nick says, is that, you know, they show a tank set up in a day, and I think in reality they do set them up in a day. That's the problem. And then they walk away, and then these things all die. They put a tank in a phone booth. So I think it does a disservice to our hobby and I think it's not just that. I mean, it's this whole trend to sensationalize television and reality shows in particular, to sensationalize animal encounters. I was lucky enough to dive with Paul and Gracie Allen many years ago in Hawaii, and they're documentary filmmakers, and they've done Love the Dolphin IMAX movies and other movies for IMAX. And he was really quite irate with a lot of the way that Discovery Channel was going and National Geographic Channel were going, because these people are going in and they're interacting with animals and they're forcing them to react. He said, I will spend weeks underwater just trying to get a natural behavior on film. And these people go in and they basically harass the animals to get them to do something. You know, and I think it does a disservice. It's just sensationalizing everything. Finding Nemo, I remember the boy who did the voice came to the Waikiki Aquarium to do a public service announcement. And we got free tickets to go see the movie. And they sent out all this literature to support it. And they were calling it the clownfish, the Amphiprion bisanctus. And we said, well, it's not. It's Ocellaris. And they said, well, no, we had an expert. But now that I live in San Francisco, Pixar is just across the bay. And they've been to the Academy and they interviewed, actually came, I can talk about it because they didn't tell me not to. But they were there asking about octopus. And they were interacting with our octopus and looking at it. So I don't think there's an octopus coming in some movie. And they also came in and filmed a bunch of stuff in front of our tank for, I guess, for the extras for the DVD for the new movie coming out. So they're interested. They want to get it right. So I think those kinds of movies. And like Nick says, it really raises awareness. I mean, every kid comes in, they want to see Nemo, they want to see Dory. And like he says, now the parents, they want to see this stuff too, and they're interested in it. What I don't like is the part about flushing them down the toilet. That sent a wrong message. That kind of sensationalized things that we know doesn't really happen at all.
I'm a huge fan of Tanked. I've been watching it for a long time, and I know every time I go on the forums and places, they're like, it's a stupid show, and they're killing everything, and they're too fast, and they're not educational enough. It's a reality TV show. It is not how it's made. Which I would love to see Tank take a Dixie Cup aquarium and do an hour of how it's made and show us how they made it exactly. I mean, who can melt acrylic into the shape of a cup with a straw? That was cool, and yet we don't get to see that. Instead, we see really crazy looking things, stunts, dragging a guy out to the middle of the desert, and, you know, cracks me up. Funny. But I'm not looking to that show to learn how to take care of my reef. I'm not expecting that show to teach others how to take care of my reef. I have Milo's Reef to teach you how to take care of a reef, and Reef Addicts, and there's Reef Central, and there's Reef to Reef, and there's so many forums that can educate you. And if these television shows and these movies get people into fish stores where they can be educated by store owners, I don't see a problem with that. If they come to the store and say, well, they did it in a day, and the store owner says you can't do it in a day, that's television, well, that's just going to be the harder part for the fish store owner to deal with. But the reality is, I mean, these tanks you're seeing here were set up at 5 a.m. this morning, and one of them has like 40 fish in it. But it's just for the day. And what we see on TV isn't always real either. You know, if you see 60 fish in a tank, it's like we just poured in 3,000 of those neon, glow-in-the-dark, totally man-made DNA fish. Well, did they leave all 6,000 in there, or was it just for the TV show because it looks amazing and they suck up 400? I don't know. I wasn't there. And, you know, I've watched a lot of these educational, not IMAX, but National Geographic where they talk about the coral reefs in Great Barrier Reef. I'm all excited, and I save it on my DVR for the day when I have time to really enjoy it. And it's so depressing. Half of it's gone, and they're all dying, and I'm like, why did I even save this? So I'm more about positivity. I don't like all the negativity. I look for the fun stuff involved. I look for the happiness involved. I look at the joy of the children. And like you said, hardly any kid does not know Nemo or Dory. They know it. They didn't know it 10 years ago or 20 years ago. And then, we've brought an awareness to it. I think there's responsibility. I think we as educators try to help people understand how it all works, the reality of it all. But at the same time, it got their interest. It got them looking our direction.
Yeah. The only thing I'll add to that, though, is that first view just keeps coming up. Nemo. I lived in Japan from 2003 to 2005. I taught English at a junior high school over there. Japan has fantastic public aquariums. They love public aquariums. They love aquariums. The reef hobby is real big there. And I can just tell you this, that 2 different times I went to public aquariums on weekdays, thinking, weekdays a good day to go instead of the weekend. But it turns out that was wrong because a lot of the kids go on field trips. So every time you go to a public aquarium, and again, they love them, so there's always lots of kids in the public aquariums, and they dress them up in little uniforms where they've all got the same shirt and pants, and they've all got like a little yellow cap or a pink cap or a blue cap, and these little groups, and it's just, they're so cute. But as you go through the whole aquarium, it doesn't matter what part you're in, every few minutes you can just hear, Nemo, 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 just a crowd of cheering. And that's a class that has finally come to the tank with the clownfish in. And they all cheer, cheer, cheer. They just all love that. And then they move on to some other part of the aquarium. Then the next group comes through. And so you can be all the way at the other end of the aquarium, and then you hear, Nemo, 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 Nemo. And so it's not even just in America. It's all over the world they know who Nemo is. They love clownfish now.
Yeah, I've been to probably about 20 Japanese aquariums, and it's very interesting because you go there and they'll have a sushi bar over in the corner. They have cooking demonstrations on how to cook the fish. It's really quite fascinating. Their whole attitude is, because they live off the ocean, they love the sea. Sustainable, right? And sustainable, yeah, of course. And then, and Nemo, what was I going to say about Nemo? Oh yeah, so we talk about Nemo in one of our shows, and we talk about, in reality, when Nemo's mom died, Marlin would become Nemo's mom. So finding Nemo too would be to find a new dad.
Can't follow that up.
All right, guys, so we're almost out of time here. To end it, we're going to ask you one last question. Should be short and sweet and to the point. What is your favorite fish? Or aquarium inhabitant?
This
you
is
get the
not going to be short. Favorite fish, blue ring angelfish, or excuse me, blue-faced angelfish. Blue ring is number 2. And favorite other thing?
or aquarium inhabitant.
Giant clams, of course.
He stole mine. I was going to say blue-faced angel because we finally had one in our reef tank. It was one of my first big angelfish that I got. I was 14 or something. Tuna, I like tuna. Salmon. I can eat, yes. No, I like the blue-faced angel, I like Navarcus angel. There was a fish that I was just thinking, I like little tiny fish too. Little tiny little gobies, And then the flame hawk, the little eyes, watching you, every movement around the tank, he's watching an inhabitant. I don't know. I love clams. I love them all.
For me, it's the mandarin. I love the psychedelic mandarin. It's always been my favorite. I always have one in my tank. At one point, I had 4. They were awesome. And I guess, man, it's such a toss-up. When it comes to clams, these guys like clams, but I only like Maxima. Everything else, like, meh. And they're just like, how can you not? I don't care. I know he's not a clam. I'm gonna get beat up. I love anemones.
My favorite fish is a yellow tang. No, I love like a good, healthy yellow tang. I love personality. Mine comes in anytime. fish. Favorite critter? It's I believe it's non-giant clams. I love managed shrimp. Kind of hard to write a whole book about them. But I had a couple of managed shrimp, one small one, one bigger one. It's the most fascinating thing. Well, I had an octopus for a little while. That's pretty cool. Just a long time. Other than that, managed shrimp is the coolest thing I've ever kept in an aquarium. If you don't mind it killing everything else. Kill everything in the tank. It's okay sometimes.
I think the favorite thing that I like to see when I'm diving are cuttlefish. They're really, really cool. And then you can be looking right at it and not see it until all of a sudden all the bumps disappear and it changes color. Oh my God, there's a cuttlefish right there.
Great, well thank you guys so much. Let's go ahead and give them a round of applause.
I have to say that my wife says her least favorite thing to see in our tank is my hand.
All right. Well, yeah, we'll go ahead and let everyone have a 5-minute break, and then we'll meet back here for the last raffle, and then the second chance raffles as well, and get it all wrapped up.